We're going to find out all about this weapon. What is it? Where was it found? Who did it belong to? And what does it have to do with Indra, Heracles and Thor? Let's talk about the mythology and work our way through to the archaeology. The people of the steppes expanded in a series of complex migrations over more than 1,000 years, starting in about 3000 BC. The exact nature of these expansions is disputed, but suffice it to say the people eventually spread Indo-European languages, culture and genetics from the British Isles to India and beyond. Wherever they went, they merged with, to one extent or another, the people who were there before. The descendant cultures have distinct features, thanks in part to this merging, and also due to a kind of cultural drift, due to physical separation over the years from the parent culture. But by employing the techniques of comparative mythology and linguistics, it is possible to discover commonalities between these descendant cultures that informs us about their common ancestor. We all know about the Indo-European myth of the striker thunderer in the forms of Thor, Heracles and Indra. It is a thunder god, the son of the Skyfather, who strikes with a hammer or an axe. He makes thunder, sends lightning bolts crashing to earth, and he is a wandering hero who slays the chaos serpent and other monsters. In ancient Greece, elements of the striker thunderer merged with the figure of the Skyfather in the form of Zeus, while the heroic deeds and monster-slaying elements found expression in his sons Heracles and Perseus. The different forms of these deities carry different striking weapons. Thor has a short-handled hammer, while Heracles famously has his wooden club. This deity's name, amongst the ancient steppe herders, may have been Perquanos, meaning the striker or the lord of oaks, because of the way lightning tends to strike oak trees. In the most cosmic version of his myth, the god uses his celestial weapon to strike down the monster who is holding back the life-giving waters, often atop a mountain, and so freeing the flow. You can imagine, perhaps, the annual dry period ending in a great storm, perhaps over the mountains, and then the rivers rising. So this myth has an origin in the steppe, just like the people who composed the Rigveda, an ancient collection of Vedic Sanskrit hymns. The Rigveda is the oldest known Vedic Sanskrit text. It's difficult to date exactly, but it has its origins from maybe as early as 1700 BC, which is astonishing. The oldest parts predominantly discuss cosmology and praise deities, and the most celebrated of all is Indra. It's impossible to overstate how awesome and beloved Indra was to these people. Listen to these verses. I tell now the manly deeds of Indra, the foremost which he did armed with the cudgel. He slew the serpent, drilled through to the waters. He split the belly of the mountains. Unconquered, powerful, victorious in battle. If you had 100 heavens, O Indra, and 100 earths, 1,000 suns would not equal you, O cudgel bearer. Indra is the epitome of the mighty warrior that slays monsters with Vajra, his divine weapon, which is mentioned repeatedly, like in these verses. The owner of golden horses takes up the weapon, golden Vajra in his hands, and desiring the glistening Vajra covered by light. So the Rigveda provides descriptions of a weapon used to deliver heavy blows, fracturing and splintering bones. It says the Vajra had a cowhide strap. The Vajra was made of metal and glistened like gold under the sun, so it must have been made of polished copper or bronze, and it was four-faced. Keep that in mind. Alright, let's talk about this burial. Years ago, when I was in the planning and research stages for what would become my Gods of Bronze series, I was reading The Horse, the Wheel and Language by David Anthony and just letting the ideas percolate. I was thinking about writing a mythological fantasy series taking place over the 3rd millennium BC as a prequel series for my Immortal Night Chronicles books, and I had all these ideas coming to me about the setting. So much changed between 3000 BC and 2000 BC. It was the transition from the Age of Stone to the Age of Bronze, and I could show so much, from the steppe migration to the building of the Great Pyramid and Stonehenge, and the early dynastic period of Mesopotamia, and eventually the rise of war chariots in the eastern steppe and the militarization of the world, and so much more. And I was thinking how amazing it would be to take a warrior from the steppes and show him coming across all of these alien civilizations, like a clash of cultures thing, like Conan the Barbarian, but a bit more historical. There was an image I had in mind of a mighty steppe herder warrior at the base of the Great Pyramid, on his way to rescue a beautiful Egyptian princess from a corrupt priest or bureaucrat or whatever. Anyway, I was struggling to get a handle on the actual lead character. I was trying to work out which figure from mythology would be most suitable. I had an idea to base it on the Odyssey, to have a Bronze Age Odysseus, but it wasn't quite right. It wasn't epic or symbolic enough. Although that's a great idea, by the way, someone should do that. And this question was on my mind as I turned the page in David Anthony's book and saw this. And it hit me like a diamond bullet right through my forehead. There it was. It couldn't have been more perfect. It looked like the club of Heracles, only it's made of the very material that defines the age. And all the pieces fell into place. My hero would be Heracles, only a figure more like Perquanos, the precursor to Heracles, and Thor and Indra and all the others. And all the stories from myth of these divine heroes could be drawn on for my series. And as my character went through the world, defeating evil, he would wield a solid metal club, just like this, only bigger and made of bronze. Anyway, before we talk in detail about this burial, we should be clear about kurgans generally. The Yamnaya culture was the earliest of a series of Bronze Age cultures of the European steppe who began building kurgans. These burial mounds, or tumuli, are their diagnostic burial tradition. Earlier ancestral populations put their dead in pits like the Yamnaya did, but the pits held multiple burials, or there was only one person in the pit, but it was a flat grave with no mound. Because the Yamnaya led a largely mobile pastoral lifestyle, there are hardly any settlements to find, so it's these tumuli that tell us about the people. And the burials were like this. They dug a central grave pit and the body was put inside, lying on the back with knees bent and raised, hands beside the body and the head usually towards the east or northeast. The grave floor and the body were liberally powdered with red ochre, and often the body was first laid on a reed mat or an animal hide. I had always assumed that these kurgans were rich in burial goods because later cultures are often like that, but that's not always the case with the Yamnaya. Many burials have nothing other than the body, and there are also many with artifacts like just a single pot or even just a shard of pottery. But there are some with copper or bronze daggers or tools, flint tools or small ornaments of shell, silver or copper. In rare cases there are wagons included, whole or disassembled, with the wheels put in the corners of the pit, as if the deceased was in the back of a wagon being driven into the afterlife. I like that. I wouldn't mind something like that. Some kurgans had a single burial pit, and others had one in the centre and one or two or more around it, sometimes buried later and sometimes at the same time as the central burial. So what about this burial then? Was this a Bronze Age Heracles or Thor or Indra? This is Burial 1 in Kurgan 4 of the Yamnaya Cemetery of Kutuluk 1. It's located in the Samara Oblast of the Volga region, near the northernmost edge of the steppe environment. It's about 21 metres, or almost 70 feet in diameter, and the height today has eroded down to under a metre. Central Grave 1 was dug into the clay subsoil. The clay taken out of the pit was spread around it in the shape of two platforms. In the centre of the northern platform, outside the central grave pit, a secondary accompanying burial was made. Here a mature female was laid on her back, with her knees raised and her head towards the east. Her feet were abundantly powdered by red ochre. Red ochre in graves goes back into the deep past. It's thought that the red ochre was symbolic of life, perhaps representing blood. It may be the case that ochre was included within the burials as a symbol of the rebirth of the individuals in the afterlife, and her body here was covered when the mound was constructed. This principal burial, Grave 1, was in a pit measuring 2.8 by 1.7 metres, or 9 foot by 5.5 feet. It was oriented with its long axis along northwest-southeast. The pit floor was 1 metre down beneath the original ground surface. A mature male was laid on his back, originally with his knees half bent, raised up, but later they fell over to the right side. The skull was found fallen forward onto the chest, the right arm was stretched out along the body, and the left was a little bent at the elbow. The body lay across the long axis of the grave, with the head oriented east-northeast. The facial area of the skull was abundantly painted with red ochre. The pelvis and the feet were less painted, and a bedding of reed mats about 0.5 centimetre thick was under the skeleton. The skeleton was of a male, 35 to 40 years old. His legs were apparently unusually long, especially the lower legs, and his forearms were also long. He stood more than 176 centimetres tall, which the research paper says is tall, but that's only 5'8", so I don't know. He had a sturdy build, wide shoulders, and a well-developed muscular system. You can tell that stuff by the dimensions of the bones. Detailed examination of the joint surfaces of the skeleton show that the man was unusually active, particularly in walking and or running. And I think he had an issue with his back too, the same sort of problems that athletes get after a career of intense activity. Radiocarbon dates suggest he lived about 3000 to 2900 BC, the early Yamnaya period, just when my series starts. This is a reconstruction of his face based on the bone structure of his skull. You'll have to imagine him with hair. So, what about this massive copper object that was found in the crook of his left arm? It is 48.7 centimetres or about 19 inches long overall, and it weighs between 750 and 767 grams, which is about 1 pound and 11 ounces. The handle part is 12.6 centimetres long. The handle is rectangular with polished edges. Some traces indicate that the handle was wrapped with a leather strap up to 7mm wide. The butt of the handle is semi-ovoid in plan and broadened in section, so it's a kind of pommel, giving it extra weight to slightly improve its balance, and the flaring end would help to brace the hand and so stop it flying from the grip when swung. You might imagine that the weapon is round, but actually it's quite flat. What they call the blade part widens at the end into a flattened diamond shape in section, with quite sharp angles, but the edges are completely blunt. This wasn't for cutting, but for smashing, striking, bludgeoning, shattering and crushing the target of its attack. It was cast in a single piece, followed by a hammer forging of the handle. It is by far the largest metal object ever found in a Yamnaya grave. It's obviously a weapon, isn't it? Anyone can see that it's a weapon, but it's a unique item, and so the archaeologists have to hedge their bets and say that it might be a ritual symbol. And to be fair, use-wear testing proved inconclusive. So there's no other weapons of this type found anywhere on the steppe. The researcher Pavel Kuznetsov says this: among all the weapon types of the Bronze Age, over a period of 1,500 years, only the Kutuluk find corresponds to the description of the Vajra in the Rigveda. Even the leather strap braiding the handle is rather pertinent in this case. End quote. So is that what this is? This is the precursor weapon to the cudgel of Indra. Myths are based in part on our earthly experiences. Indra was a mighty warrior, and the people who worshipped him above all others were mighty warriors too. This was a warrior society. So when they imagined the Vajra, did they imagine this specific type of weapon? Well, mythology doesn't really work exactly like that, does it? Or rather, the material, earthly reflection of the myth is just that. It's a reflection, it's the lesser part. Indra is so far beyond the earthly that we can barely comprehend his glory. There's this verse in the Rigveda: Indra, in whose hand the weapon was placed, like the great sun in heaven. The Vajra might be made of bronze, but it is mighty beyond measure, and it shines because it is the lightning bolt. Indra wields the power of the heavens, the power of the storm. His battles are battles of the cosmos and of the mountains towering over us. But I also think it's likely that those who worshipped him did carry their own versions of war clubs amongst their many other weapons. Some would be wooden. They're perfectly deadly, by the way. Some would be stone, and some few mighty and famous warriors, like this ancestor of theirs, might wield war clubs of copper or even bronze. Listen to this verse from the Rigveda. O Indra, getting your support, let us take cudgels like Vajra, and we will gain victory over all enemies. And it may well be then that this man, this mighty Yamnaya warrior from 3000 BC, was a worshipper of a god like Perquanos and sought to emulate him as he slew his enemies on the battlefield. We know he won great fame and glory through his deeds, because when he died, in his prime, he was buried beneath this vast kurgan with his rare and mighty weapon held in the crook of his arm, ready and able to continue slaying his enemies in the afterlife. I'm going to make another video like this about the stone battle axes of Northern Europe and how they relate to that other striker thunderer, the one who rides alone, the thunder hurler, the mighty Thor. So subscribe if you want to see that and other videos like this. Thank you for watching.